The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 in the morning, pulling Olivia Martinez from a restless sleep. She reached over and silenced it quickly, not wanting to wake Sofia, who lay curled beside her in their small apartment bedroom. The morning air was cool, and through the thin curtains, she could see the first hints of dawn painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Olivia sat up slowly, her body aching from yesterday's work, and glanced at her daughter. Sofia's dark hair spread across the pillow like silk, her small chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Olivia stood and moved quietly through their modest two-bedroom apartment in the Riverside neighborhood. The rent was manageable, barely, and the landlord was understanding when she occasionally paid a few days late. She filled the kettle for coffee and stood by the window, watching the city wake up around her. Delivery trucks rumbled past, early joggers appeared on the sidewalk, and somewhere a dog barked at the morning. This was her life now, 3 years after losing her husband Daniel in a construction accident that left her alone with a 2-year-old daughter and mountains of debt she was still climbing. She prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal and sliced banana for Sofia, then made herself black coffee. Today was going to be complicated. Her regular babysitter, Mrs. Chen from downstairs, had called yesterday evening to say she was sick with the flu. Olivia had spent half the night trying to find someone else, anyone else, but every option fell through. Her sister lived 2 states away, her mother had passed years ago, and her few friends all worked during the day. That left only one choice, one she had been dreading. She would have to bring Sofia to work. At 6:15, Olivia gently woke her daughter. Sofia opened her brown eyes sleepily and smiled up at her mother, the kind of pure, innocent smile that made everything worthwhile. Olivia helped her dress in a simple pink dress with white flowers, brushed her hair into 2 neat braids, and packed a small backpack with coloring books, crayons, a stuffed rabbit named Cotton, and some snacks. While she dressed Sofia, Olivia repeated the rules quietly but firmly. Be very quiet, do not run in the halls, do not touch anything without permission, and absolutely do not go into Mr. Reed's office unless invited. They left the apartment at 7 sharp, walking 4 blocks to the bus stop. The morning was crisp, and Sofia held her mother's hand tightly, sometimes skipping, sometimes asking questions about the birds or the flowers they passed. The bus ride took 40 minutes through the city, winding through neighborhoods that gradually became more affluent, the houses growing larger, the streets cleaner and wider. Sofia pressed her face against the window, watching the world transform around them. When they arrived at the Thornhill Estate neighborhood, everything changed. Here, the mansion sat behind iron gates and manicured lawns that stretched like green carpets. Trees lined every street in perfect rows, their branches forming canopies overhead. Security cameras dotted every corner, and private security vehicles patrolled slowly past. The Reed mansion stood at the end of Magnolia Drive, a stunning 3-story structure of white stone and glass, surrounded by gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Olivia spoke into the intercom at the gate. The head of security, Gerald, recognized her voice immediately and buzzed them through. He waved from his post as they walked up the curved driveway, and Olivia could see him smile when he noticed Sofia. They entered through the service entrance, as always, a side door that led directly into the mudroom and then the expansive kitchen. The house smelled of expensive wood polish and fresh flowers. Everything gleamed. Maria, the head cook, was already at work preparing breakfast. She was a warm woman in her 50s who had worked for the Reed family for over a decade. When she saw Sofia, her face lit up, and she immediately offered the little girl a fresh-baked muffin. Olivia thanked her softly and found a quiet corner in the breakfast nook where Sofia could sit and color while staying out of the way. She gave her daughter one more reminder to be good, then tied on her apron and began her daily routine. Olivia started in the main living room, dusting the furniture, straightening the pillows, wiping down the glass coffee table. The house was immaculate already, but maintaining perfection required constant attention. She moved through the spaces methodically, her hands efficient from years of practice. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the expensive artwork on the walls and the grand piano in the corner that no one ever played. At 8:30, she heard footsteps on the staircase. Her heart jumped. Jonathan Reed was an early riser, but she had hoped to have more time before he came down. She froze momentarily, cloth in hand, as he descended into view. Jonathan was 38 years old, tall and lean with dark hair that was always perfectly styled, even first thing in the morning. He wore tailored slacks and a crisp white shirt, already dressed for whatever video meetings or business calls filled his day. His face was handsome but severe, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that rarely smiled. He walked toward the kitchen without acknowledging Olivia, which was normal. Jonathan was not unkind, but he was distant, living in his own world of deadlines and corporate strategy. Olivia had worked for him for 2 years and could count on one hand the number of personal conversations they had shared. She continued dusting, hoping he would take his coffee and disappear back into his office on the second floor. But then she heard his footsteps stop. Heard the pause. Heard him speak. His voice came from the kitchen, measured and curious. Olivia's stomach dropped. She quickly put down her cloth and hurried toward the sound, her heart pounding. When she entered the kitchen, she saw Jonathan standing near the breakfast nook, looking down at Sofia. The little girl had been so absorbed in her coloring that she had not noticed him approach. She was humming softly to herself, using a green crayon to fill in what looked like a garden. Olivia stepped forward quickly, her voice apologetic and rushed. She explained that her babysitter was sick, that she had no one else to call, that Sofia would be quiet and would not cause any problems, that this was just for today, just this once. The words tumbled out faster than she intended, betraying her anxiety. Jonathan listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He lowered himself slightly, hands resting on his knees, and looked at Sofia's drawing. Sofia finally noticed him. She looked up with wide eyes, then smiled. She held up her picture without hesitation, pointing to the different elements she had drawn. A big house with many windows, a garden full of flowers, and a small girl standing in the middle holding a red balloon. Jonathan studied the drawing carefully, his face still serious, but something softened in his eyes. He asked her what the picture was about. Sofia explained in her small, clear voice that it was his house, because it was the most beautiful house she had ever seen, and that she was the girl because she wanted to play in the garden. For a moment, Jonathan said nothing. Then, to Olivia's complete shock, the corner of his mouth lifted in a faint smile. It was brief, almost invisible, but it was there. He straightened up, adjusted his shirt, and told Olivia it was fine. Sofia could stay. Olivia was so surprised she could barely respond, managing only a quiet thank you. Jonathan nodded once and walked back toward his office, leaving both Olivia and Sofia staring after him. Olivia exhaled slowly, her hands trembling slightly. She returned to her work, but her mind was spinning. Jonathan Reed did not smile. He did not engage with people unless it was absolutely necessary. And yet, something about Sofia had reached him. Something had cracked through that cold exterior, even if just for a second. She glanced back at her daughter, who was already coloring again, completely unbothered, humming the same tune as before. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Olivia cleaned the upstairs bathrooms, changed the linens in the guest rooms, and vacuumed the hallways. She checked on Sofia every 20 minutes, but the girl was content in her corner, surrounded by her drawings and her stuffed rabbit. At 10 o'clock, Jonathan came downstairs again. This time, he did not head straight to his office. Instead, he walked to the breakfast nook and asked Sofia if she liked pancakes. The little girl nodded enthusiastically. Jonathan called to Maria and asked her to make a small stack. Maria looked as surprised as Olivia felt but immediately got to work. Within minutes, a plate of warm pancakes with syrup and butter appeared in front of Sofia, who thanked Jonathan with the kind of earnest gratitude only children possess. He watched her eat for a moment, then returned to his office without another word. Olivia stood frozen by the hallway, trying to understand what was happening. This was not the man she knew. This was someone else entirely. Later that afternoon, as Olivia folded towels in the laundry room, Maria came to find her. The older woman leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a knowing look on her face. She told Olivia that in all her years working in that house, she had never seen Jonathan act this way. Not since his fiancée Catherine had died 4 years ago from cancer. He had shut down after that, Maria explained, stopped laughing, stopped engaging, stopped living in any real sense. And now, a 5-year-old girl with braids and a box of crayons had done what no one else could. She had made him smile. Olivia did not know what to say. She folded another towel slowly, her thoughts a tangle of confusion and something else, something she could not quite name. Hope, maybe. Or fear. She was not sure which. That evening, as she prepared to leave, she found Jonathan in the main hallway. He stopped her gently and told her that if she ever needed to bring Sofia again, it was not a problem. His voice was calm, almost kind. Olivia thanked him, her throat tight with emotion she did not want to show. On the bus ride home, Sofia fell asleep against her mother's shoulder, exhausted from the day. Olivia stared out the window at the darkening city, her mind replaying every moment. She thought about Jonathan's smile, about the way he had looked at her daughter, about the pancakes and the quiet kindness. She thought about how, for the first time in years, she had felt seen. Not as a housekeeper, not as someone performing a service, but as a person. As a mother. As someone who mattered. When they arrived home, Olivia carried Sofia inside and tucked her into bed without waking her. She sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time, watching her daughter sleep, her heart full of questions she had no answers for. Outside, the city hummed with life, indifferent and endless. But inside that small apartment, something had shifted. Something fragile and new, like the first green shoot pushing through frozen ground after a long winter. The following weeks brought changes that Olivia never expected. Sofia began accompanying her to work regularly, and what started as an emergency arrangement became something closer to routine. Jonathan seemed to welcome the presence of the little girl, though he never said so directly. He would appear in whatever room Sofia was occupying, always with some excuse, needing to check a window latch or retrieve a book from a shelf, but his eyes would linger on the child as she drew or played quietly with her toys. Olivia noticed everything. She noticed how Jonathan started leaving his office door open when he worked, something Maria said he never did before. She noticed how he began taking his coffee in the kitchen instead of his study, sitting at the counter while Sofia colored nearby, occasionally asking her about her drawings. She noticed how his face, which had been so rigid and closed when she first started working there, now held moments of softness, brief flashes of something human breaking through. One morning in late spring, Olivia arrived to find Jonathan already in the kitchen, talking with Maria about something. When he saw Sofia, he greeted her by name, which was new. Then he did something that stopped Olivia in her tracks. He handed Sofia a small box wrapped in bright yellow paper. Inside was a set of professional colored pencils, the expensive kind with dozens of shades, and a leather-bound sketchbook. Sofia's eyes went wide with wonder, and she threw her arms around Jonathan's legs in an impulsive hug. He stiffened at first, clearly unaccustomed to such displays, but then his hand came down gently on her head, and Olivia saw his expression shift into something tender. That afternoon, while Olivia cleaned the library, Jonathan found her. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, and for a moment said nothing. Then he asked about Sofia's father. The question caught Olivia off guard, but something in his tone told her it came from genuine curiosity, not judgment. She put down her duster and told him the truth. Daniel had been a construction worker, a good man who worked hard and loved his family. He had died when scaffolding collapsed on a job site 3 years ago. The company had paid a small settlement, barely enough to cover funeral costs and a few months of rent. Since then, it had been just her and Sofia, making it work however they could. Jonathan listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful. When she finished, he thanked her quietly for sharing and left the room. Olivia stood alone among the books, feeling exposed but also strangely lighter, as if speaking those words aloud to someone who actually listened had lifted some weight she had been carrying. But not everyone in Jonathan's world was pleased with these developments. His sister Rachel had been living in Europe for the past year but returned that June for an extended visit. Rachel Reed was everything Olivia was not: polished, educated at elite schools, connected to old money families, and fiercely protective of her family's reputation. She was 35, impeccably dressed, and had opinions about everything. From the moment she arrived and saw Sofia playing in the garden, her disapproval was palpable. Rachel cornered Olivia in the hallway on her second day back. Her voice was smooth but cold as she asked how long this arrangement had been going on. Olivia explained truthfully, keeping her tone respectful. Rachel's smile was thin and did not reach her eyes. She suggested that perhaps it would be more appropriate for Olivia to find proper childcare, that mixing personal and professional boundaries was unwise, that her brother had been through enough without unnecessary complications. The message was clear: Sofia was not welcome, and by extension, neither was Olivia's presence beyond her role as staff. That evening, Olivia overheard raised voices from Jonathan's study. She was not trying to eavesdrop, but the door was partially open, and Rachel's voice carried. Rachel was telling Jonathan that people were starting to talk, that his behavior was inappropriate, that he was allowing the help to take advantage of his kindness. Jonathan's response was measured but firm. He told his sister that Sofia was a child who brought joy into a house that had known too much grief, that Olivia was a dedicated employee who worked harder than anyone he knew, and that Rachel's concerns were based on snobbery rather than any real problem. The argument ended with a door slamming and Rachel storming past Olivia without acknowledgement. Jonathan emerged a moment later, his jaw tight with tension. When he saw Olivia standing there, clearly having heard at least part of the exchange, he stopped. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. He told her not to worry about Rachel, that his sister had strong opinions but no actual authority, and that Sofia was welcome in his home for as long as Olivia needed. Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but deeply felt. Olivia nodded, unable to trust her voice, and Jonathan gave her a small, almost sad smile before returning to his study. That night, lying in bed with Sofia asleep beside her, Olivia found herself thinking about Jonathan in ways she had not allowed before. Not as her employer, but as a man. A man who was lonely. A man who had known loss. A man who, despite his wealth and status, seemed to understand what it meant to carry grief. The summer progressed, and the tension with Rachel simmered beneath the surface of everything. But despite his sister's disapproval, Jonathan continued to draw closer to both Olivia and Sofia. He began joining them for lunch occasionally, sitting at the kitchen table and listening to Sofia's endless stories about the butterflies in the garden or the birds she had named. He taught her how to play chess one rainy afternoon, patiently explaining the moves while Olivia worked nearby, her heart doing strange things in her chest as she watched them together. One particularly hot evening in July, a sudden thunderstorm rolled through the city. The rain came down in sheets, and by the time Olivia's shift ended, the streets were flooded. The buses had stopped running, and her phone showed alerts about dangerous driving conditions. Jonathan found her in the mudroom, staring out at the downpour with Sofia's hand in hers, clearly trying to figure out what to do. Without hesitation, he told her they should stay the night. The house had plenty of guest rooms, and it was not safe to travel. Olivia hesitated, but Sofia was tired, and the rain showed no signs of stopping. She accepted. Maria prepared a light dinner, and they ate together at the kitchen table, the four of them: Jonathan, Olivia, Sofia, and Maria. It felt almost like a family meal, casual and warm, so different from the formal atmosphere that usually pervaded the house. After dinner, Jonathan showed them to a guest room on the second floor. It was beautiful, with a large bed, soft linens, and an attached bathroom. He wished them good night, his hand lingering on the doorframe for just a moment before he left. Later, after Sofia had fallen asleep, Olivia found she could not rest. She wandered downstairs quietly and discovered Jonathan in the living room, sitting by the large windows, watching the storm. He heard her approach and turned. She apologized for disturbing him, but he shook his head and gestured for her to join him. They sat together in the dim light, the rain drumming against the glass, and for the first time, they talked not as employer and employee, but as two people who had both known pain. Jonathan told her about Catherine, his fiancée. They had been together for 5 years, engaged for 1, when she was diagnosed. He described watching her fade, the helplessness he felt, the way he shut down after she died because feeling anything at all was too overwhelming. He said the house had become a mausoleum, a place he existed in but did not truly live. Until Sofia arrived with her crayons and her laughter and her complete lack of awareness that she was supposed to be intimidated by him. Olivia shared her own story more fully, the struggles of the past 3 years, the nights she cried after Sofia went to sleep, the constant fear of not being enough, of failing her daughter. She told him about the guilt she carried, the what-ifs that haunted her about the night Daniel died. Jonathan listened with complete attention, and when she finished, he did something that surprised her. He reached over and took her hand. His grip was warm and steady, and he told her that she was not failing, that Sofia was lucky to have her, that he could see the love in everything she did. They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, watching the storm together. When Olivia finally returned to the guest room, her heart was pounding, her mind racing with feelings she had buried for years. She barely slept, and when morning came, the house felt different. The storm had passed, leaving everything clean and fresh, but something inside Olivia had shifted too. She could not deny anymore what was growing between them, and she was terrified. Over the following weeks, the connection deepened. Jonathan found reasons to seek her out during the day. He asked her opinion on things, books he was reading, decisions he was making. He started attending to small details of her life, noticing when she seemed tired, ensuring Maria sent her home with leftovers, quietly arranging for a bonus in her paycheck without explanation. And Olivia, despite knowing how complicated and impossible it all was, found herself falling for him. She tried to fight it, tried to maintain professional distance, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. Rachel noticed, of course. She made cutting remarks at every opportunity, always when Jonathan was not around. She asked Olivia pointed questions about her intentions, her background, her finances. She suggested that some people try to improve their circumstances through inappropriate relationships with their employers. The word stung because Olivia knew how it looked, knew what people would think. But she also knew her own heart, and it was not scheming or calculating. It was simply open, dangerously so, to a man who had shown her kindness when she needed it most. One afternoon, Jonathan asked Olivia to join him on the terrace. Sofia was napping inside, and the summer sun was beginning its descent toward evening. He had something to tell her, he said. His voice was serious, and Olivia's stomach knotted with anxiety. But what he said was not what she expected. He told her that he had been thinking a lot lately about his life, about what mattered, about what he wanted his future to look like. He said that for the first time since Catherine died, he felt alive again. And it was because of her and Sofia. Olivia's breath caught. Jonathan continued, his words careful but earnest. He said he understood the complexity of their situation, the questions it would raise, the judgment they would face. But he also said he was tired of living in fear, tired of letting other people's opinions dictate his choices. He asked her, directly and simply, if she felt anything for him beyond gratitude or professional respect. If there was any possibility that what he was feeling might be mutual. Olivia looked into his eyes, those dark eyes that had been so cold when she first met him and now held so much warmth. She thought about lying, about protecting herself and Sofia from potential heartbreak. But she had never been good at dishonesty. So she told him the truth. Yes, she felt something. She had been feeling it for weeks, maybe longer, and it terrified her because she did not belong in his world, because people like Rachel would never accept her, because the gap between them was so vast it seemed impossible to bridge. But yes, her heart had chosen him anyway, without permission, without reason, and she did not know what to do about it. Jonathan smiled, a real smile, full and genuine. He told her they would figure it out together. Then he leaned forward and kissed her, soft and tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Olivia's eyes closed, and for a moment, the world disappeared. There was only the warmth of his lips, the gentleness of his hand on her cheek, the impossible rightness of it all. When they pulled apart, both were breathless, and Olivia felt tears on her face though she had not realized she was crying. That kiss changed everything. They began seeing each other not just during work hours but in the evenings after Sofia went to sleep. Jonathan would call her, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. He started taking them on outings, to parks and museums, always careful to maintain some plausible deniability, but the truth was obvious to anyone paying attention. They were falling in love, deeply and irrevocably, despite all the reasons they should not. But the happiness was fragile, and both of them knew it. Rachel's hostility was growing, and she had begun making threats, talking about family lawyers and propriety clauses and scandals. Jonathan tried to shield Olivia from the worst of it, but she could see the strain it put on him. And then, one ordinary morning in late August, everything became infinitely more complicated. Olivia woke up feeling nauseous, a sensation she remembered all too well from years before. She ignored it at first, told herself it was stress or bad food. But when it persisted day after day, she could no longer deny the possibility. She bought a test on her way home from work, her hands shaking as she paid for it. That night, alone in her bathroom while Sofia watched cartoons in the living room, Olivia took the test. The 2 lines appeared almost immediately, clear and undeniable. She was pregnant. With Jonathan's child. The room spun and she had to sit down on the edge of the tub, her mind a chaos of emotion. Fear, joy, panic, wonder. All of it crashed over her at once. She had no idea how to tell him, no idea what this would mean for them, for Sofia, for the fragile relationship they had been building. But one thing was certain, there was no going back now. Their lives were intertwined completely, and the world was about to get much more complicated. Olivia carried the secret for 3 days before she found the courage to tell Jonathan. Those were perhaps the longest 3 days of her life, filled with internal debate and spiraling anxiety. She went to work as usual, performed her duties, smiled at Sofia, and tried to act normal. But inside, she was unraveling. Jonathan noticed immediately that something was wrong. He asked her repeatedly if she was okay, if she needed anything, his concern genuine and gentle. Each time, she deflected, saying she was just tired or had a headache. But she knew she could not keep it hidden much longer. On the 3rd evening, after Sofia had been put to bed in the guest room that had become unofficially hers, Olivia asked Jonathan if they could talk. They went to his study, the door closing behind them with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet house. Jonathan sat on the leather couch and gestured for her to join him, but Olivia remained standing, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles turned white. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words would not come. How did you tell someone something like this? How did you announce that everything was about to change in ways neither of them had planned? Jonathan stood and came to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. His voice was soft and worried as he asked what was wrong. And suddenly, standing there in the lamplight with his concerned eyes on her face, Olivia could not hold it back anymore. The words tumbled out in a rush. She was pregnant. She had taken the test multiple times to be sure. It was early, maybe 6 weeks, but there was no doubt. She was carrying his child. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Jonathan's hands remained on her shoulders, but his face went very still, processing. Olivia felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she began to apologize, to say she understood if this was too much, if he wanted to end things, if he needed space. She told him she was not trying to trap him, that she would figure it out on her own if necessary, that she just thought he deserved to know. The words kept coming, a flood of fear and preemptive rejection, until Jonathan stopped her. He pulled her into his arms and held her tightly, his face pressed into her hair. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. He told her she had nothing to apologize for. That this was not something she did alone. That he was overwhelmed, yes, but not in a bad way. He pulled back to look at her face, wiping the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. He asked if she was okay, if she had seen a doctor yet, if she needed anything. The concern in his voice, the immediate shift to care rather than panic or anger, made Olivia cry harder. She shook her head, admitting she had not been to a doctor yet, that she had been too scared and confused to think that far ahead. Jonathan guided her to sit down and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. He told her they would go to a doctor together, as soon as possible. That they would face this together, whatever it meant. That he was not going anywhere. Olivia searched his face for signs of doubt or resentment but found none. Only sincerity and a kind of wonder beginning to break through the initial shock. He asked if she wanted the baby, and she nodded immediately. Despite everything, despite the impossibility of it all, yes. She wanted this child. Jonathan's face broke into a slow smile, and he leaned forward to kiss her forehead, then her lips, gentle and reassuring. They sat together for a long time, holding each other, letting the reality sink in. Eventually, Jonathan told her something that surprised her. He said he had been thinking about their future, about what a life together might look like. He had been planning to wait, to take things slowly, but this changed the timeline. And he was okay with that. More than okay. He said he had not felt this certain about anything in years. The next morning, Jonathan called his personal physician and arranged for Olivia to be seen that afternoon. The doctor was professional and kind, asking questions, running tests, and performing an ultrasound. As they watched the grainy image on the screen, the doctor pointed out the small forms visible in the darkness. Then she said something that made both Olivia and Jonathan freeze. There were 2 heartbeats. 2 separate gestational sacs. Olivia was carrying twins. The room seemed to tilt. Olivia stared at the screen, unable to process what she was hearing. Twins. 2 babies. The doctor smiled and confirmed it, showing them each tiny form, explaining that everything looked healthy and normal for this stage. Identical twins, she said, which was rarer and happened by chance rather than heredity. Olivia felt Jonathan's hand tighten around hers, and when she finally tore her eyes from the screen to look at him, she saw his face transform. The shock gave way to something else, something brighter. He was smiling, really smiling, and there were tears in his eyes. They left the clinic in a daze. In the car, Jonathan kept glancing at her, shaking his head in disbelief, and then laughing softly. Twins. They were going to have twins. Olivia felt the weight of it settling over her, the enormity of bringing 2 new lives into an already complicated situation. But Jonathan seemed energized, almost euphoric. He talked about converting rooms in the house, about hiring help, about everything they would need. He talked about the future as if it was already decided, as if she and Sofia and the babies would all be living there with him. Olivia wanted to believe it could be that simple, but she knew better. That night, after putting Sofia to bed, Jonathan asked Olivia to come back to the study. She thought they were going to discuss logistics, plan their next steps. But instead, Jonathan sat her down and told her he had made a decision. He did not want to wait anymore. He did not want to hide what they were to each other. He wanted to make it official, permanent, real. Then he pulled a small box from his desk drawer and opened it. Inside was a ring. Not an ostentatious diamond, but a beautiful sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, elegant and timeless. Jonathan told her it had been his grandmother's ring, the one woman in his family who had married for love rather than status or money. He said his grandmother had been a schoolteacher who married a factory worker, and their marriage had been the happiest he had ever witnessed. He wanted that for them. He wanted to marry Olivia, not because she was pregnant, but because he loved her. Because she had brought light back into his life. Because he could not imagine a future without her. Olivia was crying again, overwhelmed by the emotion of it all. She told him yes before he even finished asking the question properly. Yes, she would marry him. Yes, she wanted to build a life together. Yes, despite all the obstacles and judgment they would face. Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger, and they held each other, 2 people who had found each other in the midst of their separate griefs and somehow created something new and beautiful. But reality intruded quickly. The next day, Rachel discovered the truth. She had come to the house unannounced and found Olivia in the kitchen, her hand resting unconsciously on her still flat stomach while she talked with Maria. Rachel's eyes missed nothing. She cornered Olivia later and demanded to know if she was pregnant. When Olivia confirmed it, Rachel's face went white with rage. She called Olivia horrible names, accused her of entrapment and gold digging, said she would not allow this farce to continue. She threatened to contact lawyers, to challenge Jonathan's mental competency, to do whatever it took to protect the family name and fortune. Olivia stood her ground, though she was shaking. She told Rachel that she loved Jonathan, that they were getting married, and that Rachel's opinion would not change that. Rachel laughed bitterly and said they would see about that. Then she stormed out, promising this was far from over. Olivia found Jonathan immediately and told him everything. His face darkened with anger, not at her but at his sister's cruelty. He told Olivia he would handle Rachel, and his tone left no room for argument. The confrontation came that evening. Rachel arrived with a lawyer, armed with paperwork and threats. She claimed Jonathan was not thinking clearly, that he was being manipulated, that the family's reputation and assets were at risk. She presented documents she wanted him to sign, agreements that would essentially cut Olivia and the babies out of any claim to his wealth. Jonathan listened calmly until she finished, then told her in no uncertain terms that he would sign nothing. That he was of sound mind and body. That he loved Olivia and intended to marry her. That the babies were his and he would protect them and their mother with everything he had. Rachel played her final card. She threatened to go public with the story, to leak it to tabloids and society pages, to make sure everyone knew that Jonathan Reed was marrying his housekeeper who conveniently got pregnant. She said the scandal would destroy his business relationships and tarnish the family name forever. Jonathan looked at his sister with something close to pity and told her to do whatever she felt she needed to do. He was done living his life according to other people's expectations. He was done letting fear and judgment dictate his choices. If she wanted to make a spectacle of it, that was her choice, but it would not change his. The lawyer tried to interject, but Jonathan cut him off. He told them both to leave his house and not return until they could treat Olivia with respect. Rachel stood there, shocked that her threats had not worked, that for once her younger brother was standing up to her. She tried one more time, invoking their dead parents, Catherine's memory, family loyalty. But Jonathan was unmoved. He opened the door and waited. Finally, Rachel left, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. The lawyer followed, and the house fell silent. In the aftermath, Jonathan gathered his entire household staff. He introduced Olivia as his fiancée and explained that she was pregnant with twins. He told them he understood if anyone was uncomfortable with the situation and wanted to seek employment elsewhere, but that this was his life and his choice. To his surprise and relief, no one left. Maria hugged Olivia with tears in her eyes. Gerald, the security chief, shook Jonathan's hand and congratulated them both. Even the gardeners and maintenance staff offered their support. It turned out that everyone who worked in that house had seen what was happening, had watched Jonathan come back to life, and they were happy for him. The following weeks brought challenges. Rachel did make good on her threat to spread gossip, and society pages ran stories speculating about Jonathan Reed's sudden romance with his household employee. There were unkind articles and nasty comments online. Some of Jonathan's business associates distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the unconventional nature of it all. But others reached out with congratulations and support. And Jonathan weathered it all with remarkable calm, his hand always finding Olivia's whenever they appeared in public together. They were married in a small ceremony in the garden of the Reed mansion 2 months later. Sofia served as flower girl, beaming in a white dress and scattering rose petals with great seriousness. Maria stood as Olivia's witness, and Gerald stood for Jonathan. There were no society guests, no elaborate reception, just the people who mattered most. Olivia wore a simple cream dress that accommodated her growing belly, and Jonathan could not stop smiling the entire day. When the officiant pronounced them married, he kissed her in front of everyone, and Sofia cheered loudly, making everyone laugh. As autumn arrived, Olivia's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Jonathan had converted 2 adjoining rooms into a nursery, sparing no expense on cribs, changing tables, and every conceivable baby item. Sofia was thrilled about becoming a big sister and talked constantly to Olivia's belly, telling her future brothers about all the things they would do together. The house, which had been so cold and empty when Olivia first started working there, was now filled with laughter, planning, and anticipation. Rachel eventually came around, though it took time. She appeared one day in November, asking to speak with Jonathan privately. Olivia gave them space, though she was anxious about what might be said. When they emerged an hour later, Rachel's face was softer, less hostile. She approached Olivia and, with obvious difficulty, apologized for her behavior. She said she had been protecting an idea of what she thought her brother's life should be, rather than accepting what would actually make him happy. She asked if they could start over, and Olivia, who had no interest in prolonged family conflict, agreed. In December, as the first snow fell on the city, Olivia went into labor 3 weeks early. Jonathan drove her to the hospital with Sofia in the back seat, everyone trying to stay calm. The labor was long and difficult, but finally, just after midnight, 2 healthy baby boys entered the world. They were identical, with dark hair like their father and tiny perfect features. Jonathan held them both, tears streaming down his face, whispering to them about how loved they were, how wanted, how their mother was the bravest person he had ever known. Olivia looked at her family gathered around her hospital bed. Sofia, who had been allowed in briefly, stared at her new brothers with wonder. Jonathan sat beside Olivia, still holding one baby while she held the other. Maria had sent flowers that filled the room with fragrance. Even Rachel had sent a gift, a beautiful handmade blanket with a note of congratulations. This was her family now, strange and imperfect and utterly unexpected. She had come to that mansion 2 years ago just looking for work, a way to survive. And somehow, in that cold house with that cold man, she had found warmth. She had found love. She had found home. As she drifted off to sleep that night, exhausted but content, Olivia thought about how life unfolds in ways we never predict. How loss can lead to new beginnings. How the most unlikely people can become our greatest blessings. She thought about the morning she had brought Sofia to work for the first time, terrified and apologetic, never imagining that simple act would change everything. And she was grateful, deeply grateful, for every twist and turn that had led her here, to this moment, surrounded by love she never thought she would find again. Outside the hospital window, snow continued to fall softly on the sleeping city, covering everything in quiet white, making the world new. And in that room, a family rested together, imperfect and real and absolutely complete.